General Venkatesh, dignitaries in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed an honor for me to come back to the institution where I spent a fair part of my service. It's a sort of homecoming for me. Now, at the very outset, I express my gratitude to Brigadier Poonam and her organizing team for this conference for giving me this opportunity to be here. I bring you greetings from the land which has been blessed by divinity. It's Kerala. They call it God's own country, full of greenery and plenty of waterways, which makes it so unique and beautiful. When I received this title and the subtext or the tagline for this conference from Brigadier Poonam about a month or so back, I was honestly very baffled. This is a conference on artificial intelligence, which, as we have heard the speakers say, that this is the future. Why then should someone look at the past? I presume and believe in the old English adage that past is indeed the prologue to the future. When we start, let us start with the divinity. And my interpretation of divinity, whichever form or shape that it is in, it is that unique force which has blessed us with knowledge, wisdom, and skills to solve the problems, be in everyday life or otherwise. In short, to me, divinity is the innate inspirational intelligence that we all have. What then is artificial intelligence? Something that I do not know of, and therefore I thought we will check out with the artificial intelligence what it thinks of divinity. So I went back to what is ubiquitous in everybody's terminology now, Chat GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, for its take on divinity, and it was shocking. It said the concept of divinity is typically associated with the transcendent qualities attributed to a deity, and artificial intelligence has the potential to acquire those qualities with which we define divinity. It says it can create like the gods in heaven, that it can be omnipresent and transcend the human consciousness, and it is definite that it will be worshipped. In short, artificial intelligence believes that it is digital divinity of the future. I don't know what you think about it, but there is plenty of time to think about it in the next 3 days. So there we have at one end of the spectrum, the intelligence that we have, intuitive intelligence that we have, which resides in 1,500 grams of jelly with nearly 86 billion neurons and 1 trillion neuronal connections. And the other end, the intelligence created tool to assist itself, the artificial intelligence. I'm only worried, as General Venkatesh also said, whether the creation will finally one day swallow the creator. So let's start at the very beginning in this saga. It's a huge, long one. There are multiple times when we have faced existential problems for which the intelligence have found tremendous solutions. And we see a whole lot of crackpots and geniuses trying to solve them. And this is their story in a very abridged form. So when we begin, let's begin at the Slide is stuck. When we begin, let us go to those prehistoric time when we were all fish in water. And when we developed an ambition to go terrestrial, to become amphibians. This epoch-making event in history is marked by this fossil fish you see on the right side, which is different from the other in two aspects, because it has got a forefin which is articulated. It is the primordial forelimb of the mammals that we have. And of course, a dent on the dorsal surface right behind the head, which was the place where the neck was going to develop. It was an essential thing that when you became terrestrial, you need to have a whole lot of muscles and an extended neck so that it can look around, it can move, separate from the shoulder girdle, so that it can look around for the prey as well as the predator. A form of muscles called culcuralis or hypobranchial muscles evolved to solve this existential problem. So we have salamanders and other amphibians which prove this point. The neck that developed created the entire layout of the head and neck, the playfield of ENT. It was given all the muscles for so much so that it can move around, it can move its head. It had a conduit of blood vessels taking in the fuel in and taking the waste out. And of course, the neuronal connections right from the brain down to the last bit of the body came through the neck. So this was the organization which I thought was perfect. The brain, the supercomputer up there in thick calvarium, and right next to it, 4 of the 5 sense organs placed in proximity so that it can give real-time information to the brain to solve the problems. And finally, below that, 2 passages for the fuel for the human body. One, of course, is the oxygen through the nasal passage, and food through the alimentary, to the mouth and alimentary tract. There comes the rub. A design fault definitely was built into the system. Simple. When you eat food, it had to go behind the tongue, cross the oropharynx, and go back into the esophagus posteriorly. When you breathe, it hits the nasopharynx, turns around, comes to the oropharynx, cross the food tract, and go right in front into the trachea. If things didn't go the opposite ways, food will go into the trachea, you will choke to death. Or if the air went into the stomach, you will starve to death. Evolution had to find a solution, or rather I would say intelligence had to find a solution. And that was the human larynx. Right inside this cartilaginous framework, it gave us a valve, 2 thin elastic bands called the vocal cords, which could close and open so that when you eat, you can't speak. When you speak, you can't breathe. These vocal cords have to move constantly, abduct and adduct, so that the passage is closed exactly like a reed valve in a flute. But then there was a problem in the 1800s that we could only diagnose anything inside by looking outside. Nobody could see inside. And here is a curious story of a Spanish postman, Manuel Garcia, who was also part-time conductor of a choir. There was a lot of sick absenteeism. Singers used to come and say that I've got a sore throat. He wanted to quantify it. And what did he do? He got some reflected light into the oral cavity and put a simple mirror there to see the larynx. He, therefore, legitimately did the first endoscopy. We know where we stand today from those days as regards to endoscopy. We, as ENT surgeons, cannot think of a life without it. Equally so was another Swiss surgeon, practiced in Vienna. History says that he was a poor student, Very poor medical student, but he had one unique quality, a risk-taking surgeon. By the time the problem of laryngeal cancers came to him, he had already done gastrojejunostomy and anastomosis. We are all heard of Bill Roth 1 and 2. And he decided to quell the confusion in the fraternity that can we live without a larynx, even if it has been invaded by cancer. So on one particular day in 1873, in a lecture hall under ether, a 68-year-old person with terminal cancer, the larynx was removed in toto. Laryngectomy, first total laryngectomy, which paved the way for the entire subspecialty of head and neck surgery, especially oncosurgery. Of course, he never published his papers. He was very poor in that. It is his assistant, Carl Gusenbauer, who published it much later. Of course, he was commemorated in stamps and coins much later. We also have another problem here. The movement of the cords are controlled by predominantly by one nerve, which controlled literally all the movements except one other nerve. And therefore, if you that nerve gets paralyzed, it creates a small gap in between the two vocal cords, letting the air go, and the voice goes for a 6. From the radical surgery that Bill Roth suggested, here was a conservative surgeon who wanted to conserve voice. He was Nobuhiko Ishiki. Ishiki had a very simple solution. Make a window in the laryngeal cartilage just opposite the vocal cords, push in a substance, something hard like silicone or Gore-Tex, and there, by pushing it, pushes the vocal cord and the voice is back again. He therefore created this simple surgery called thyroplasty. What began as a mobilization of the vocal cords medially later went on to separate the vocal cords or lateralize them. Again, we could shorten the vocal cords to transform the voice from andro to gyne, and the reverse, lengthen the vocal cords as well. And he was an innovator who started voice conservation surgery, and he deserves all merit for that. From larynx to the nose, we have a fair amount of confusing anatomy there. It's a maze indeed, with so many cul-de-sacs and minimally access to deeper and inner parts, as you can see here. How do we see the inside of it? And for this, we owe it to 3 non-clinicians for having contributed much to our specialty. First of them is an Indian, or rather an Indian American, Narendra Singh Kampani. He is known as the man who bent light, and the fortune called him the most unrecognized academist in the world. Well, what he did was to find simple principle of optics total internal reflection through a flexible tube, taking the light far and wide without losing the illumination. It's a curious fact that he finally ended up as an Indian ordnance factory officer at the behest of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Along with him was his co-worker, Harold Hopkins, who created a system of lenses called rod lens system, where multiple lenses with airspace in between gave birth to the rigid endoscopes that we know today. And along with it, 2 scientists, Boyle and Smith, they discovered a microchip called charge coupled device, which could capture images in real time and display it. Well, if you go to any ENT OT today, there is fiber optic devices, rigid endoscopes, and we can see